Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're a leader sponsoring AI work, today's show is for you. And we're really glad you've joined us. Here's what we're seeing everywhere. Leaders are sponsoring AI projects without a clear sense of what's realistic. And that often leads to asking for the wrong things, wasting cycles, slower adoption. I'm Kimberly Cottrell, Senior Manager of Storytelling and Global Skilling at Microsoft, and today I'm here with Alfredo Ramirez, who will share what he's learned while leading revenue strategy at Microsoft, and how vibe coding helps leaders like him see the full spectrum of what's possible beyond chat. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alfredo.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly.
It's great to have you. So before we jump in, a quick word on who this conversation is for. This is for business leaders, executives, and problem solvers. People who sponsor AI projects and set direction and are accountable for those outcomes. And by the end of today's conversation, you're going to see why you don't need to code to build with AI. You just need to know what to ask for. And do not worry, this is not a coding tutorial. With vibe coding, you don't even need to know how to code. Instead, you can describe in plain language what you want to build, and AI generates working software. But it's not magic. Vibe coding requires structured thinking, and we're going to unpack all of that today with Alfredo. A couple of housekeeping notes before we dive in. We're here with you live today, and this conversation is being recorded, so the replay will be available right after this. You can share it and watch it again if you'd like. And as we go, please drop questions into the chat at any time. We welcome all questions, and we especially love questions that are grounded in real scenarios, things you're actually trying to solve or decisions you're wrestling with right now. And we'll pull as many of those in as we can into the conversation. So we've got Alfredo Ramirez here with us today. He is Vice President of Revenue Strategy at Microsoft, where his team leads sales planning, performance management, and commercial transformation across Microsoft's global sales organization. A huge job. What makes today's conversation especially relevant is that Alfredo's team is living this vibe coding work. They are a business team building what they need using the same AI tools that they help the rest of the organization adopt. And they're vibe coding effectively. And Alfredo is going to share how they got to this point. So with that, let's get started, Alfredo.
Awesome.
Awesome. So to kick us off, I'd love to start with, in just 1 minute, how would you briefly describe the problem that made you realize that your teams needed a new way of working?
You should have put a timer in my line of sight. So I think that the biggest challenge here is that we've been approaching this age of AI, I think, in the way that we still do traditional software development and sort of traditional technology innovation, where the business, right, the folks that understand the problems that they're trying to solve, who are deep and steeped in the processes and problem space that they want to go after, don't actually have access to the tools. Instead, they write these long, requirement documents that they iterate a lot on. And then ultimately, those don't fully capture, the needs of what they need to go solve for. Right. And so you ship over these, requirement docs. Engineering goes and builds something for you, and what they come back with often doesn't reflect or cover the problem space that you were trying to go after. And so I think that as we enter into this new era, we want to rethink that paradigm and approach things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true in traditional ways of working that the people living the work have been so far from the people who are building the tools to help them with their solutions. So that's what really excites me about vibe coding too. So you mentioned that by the time a solution shows up, the problem has often shifted. What does that gap look like in real life? So what's an example of kind of that gap between the solution, once it shows up, the problem is you have a new problem to solve?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because there's sort of a twofold issue here. One is, the ability to capture these specifications or these requirements in such a way that engineering teams that don't have domain knowledge can go and perfectly solve them is actually really challenging. I mean, this is like our traditional sort of like back and forth development process that, quite frankly, has always been difficult. And then it really doesn't scale in today's age where the problem space is moving really quickly, right? The problem you have today may be quite different from the problem that you have tomorrow. Or, as is often the case, we're going after new problems. We're trying to enter into this new age of innovation. The market is shifting very rapidly. We're all seeing our industries transform and shift in real time. And so we don't actually necessarily have complete understanding of what the problem we're trying to solve is, or that problem itself is becoming different and mutating over the course of even weeks.
Right.
And so this traditional model of, hey, I write this requirements doc, you come back to me in 3 months with a solution, by that point, like, the puck has moved.
Yes.
And so we need to think about it differently.
It's so true. So the puck has moved. There's been big shifts from translating requirements through all these layers and all this time to people working closest to the work, shaping those solutions. So for our leaders who are listening, if you want to close this gap between the people doing the work and the people building the tools, what do you focus on first? How do you get started?
I think the main thing is just to get started and to make it real, right? I think that the challenge isn't that you don't have like expertise or folks who can solve these problems. It's that we haven't actually traditionally put these tools and these capabilities in the hands of the people who best understand the problem space. Now, to be fair, traditionally the barrier for entry was really high, right? You needed to understand, different kinds of frameworks and programming languages and technology stacks that are a very specialized, domain knowledge and understanding. And what happens in this world of AI is that barrier for entry is dramatically reduced.
Right.
And so for me, what it looked like is you show up and you show folks what you can build. Show them their own data, their own challenges, and how you can very quickly start to solve some of those things in real time. And so it's not about training. It's not about some sort of mandatory exercise, but really just creating the art of the possible, lighting that up for folks in real time, and suddenly the conversation will shift, away from like, well, what does AI mean for me? What does AI mean for my business or my role? To, okay, what can I go build next? And that's when you start to see real acceleration.
Awesome. So just start building. I love that. Okay, so how vibe coding, I love how it can get you to that prototype earlier. So just start building, you can get that prototype while the context is still fresh. When you are able to react to something real that early, so when you can collapse the time it takes to build the solutions, how does it change the way you lead and the decisions that you can make as a leader?
I think fundamentally it enables you to get a lot more precise and tactile about the things that you're trying to go after, and also start to clarify your assumptions and start to think about things in terms of the experiences that you're trying to create and the processes that you're trying to enable, versus iterating on PowerPoint strategy slides or do you mean this or that? Instead, it's show me, and we can figure it out in real time and actually iterate very quickly. And so you kind of get two things. One is you move so much faster, but it also means that by the time you're ready for a prototype to get scaled out by an engineering team, you've worked through a lot of the ambiguity. You've gotten to a lot of real clarity around the type of experience you're trying to create for folks. And that actually helps the engineering teams as well deliver something that is much more true to the vision and to the problem that you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge. So I just wanted to pause and give a quick recap for those of us who are just joining. As we are live, I'm here with Alfredo Ramirez, VP of Strategy, Revenue Strategy at Microsoft, and we're digging into the rise of the business builder, how vibe coding helps teams get real value from AI and beyond. So back to our questions, Alfredo. With that, what does vibe coding actually require? It almost sounds too easy.
Yeah, so it's not magic, right? And I know that there's probably infinite YouTube videos that talk about like this one trick, or you don't need to know anything anymore. You just make a wish, right? And the AI agent will deliver. And it's not that simple. Like, this still requires structured thinking. It requires you to understand your problem space. The agent, the coding agent, doesn't know your process, and it certainly doesn't know where your documented process deviates from like the lived experience of folks actually doing the work. But that's what you already have in your teams, right? You have these technical domain experts, folks that understand, the hard work that has to happen, the processes that need optimizing, where there's real pain points that they want to solve for. And then it comes down to being able to really understand that problem space and describe it in a structured way, such that an AI coding agent can implement it. So like the thinking is the work, and the AI handles the implementation.
100%, 100%. So when you first started doing live demos on your team, using your team's real data, real workflows in the room, what shifted in people and how they reacted when they actually saw kind of what you could do with the real data, the real work, and what did they want to do next? Can you tell us more about that live demo process with your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I realized was that we were focusing a lot on developer productivity and what coding agents mean for the traditional software developer, and not really thinking about what it could mean for folks that have some of that, those foundational skills I just described, but who aren't traditional developers. And we've been told that tools like, VS Code or GitHub Copilot are really only for devs. And that a business user will never sit down with a command line interface or learn, VS Code. And what I actually found was the opposite. I stood up an optional, completely optional, weekly AI acceleration session, where I started off by sort of just showing folks some of the basics and some of those, demos that you're alluding to. And what happened next really surprised me, I expected that folks would pick this up, but I did not expect the pace at which it would start to happen. And so we meet every week, and people just bring in their projects. There's no polish required. This isn't, a presentation or a review. It's just an opportunity for folks to workshop and to share the things that they've learned, their tips and tricks. I had somebody on my team on our very second session, show how they could respond live to a support escalation using a process, an automated process that they built, in VS Code that saved them, dozens of hours compared to what they would normally do. And then that just builds on itself, right? Because you'll have these early adopters, these folks that are willing to take that first step. And then when they show what they can do and how easy it is, despite not being traditional developers, suddenly other folks are like, oh, well, maybe I can do that too. And you start to sort of get this snowball, rolling down a hill effect that's really magical to watch.
That's so cool. That's amazing. All right. So you have a large team. There's managers, there's individual contributors. They're starting to build before they ask. So something that you say is, stop asking for permission, just go build. What did you do to make that shift stick with your team?
So I think a big part of it is being willing to accept that not everything has to be polished at all times, right? And so really embracing that innovation, embracing experimentation, moving away from a culture of reviews and presentations to a culture sort of labs and in the kitchen, and just empowering everyone to have access to the tools, and then getting out of the way to some degree, right? And suddenly folks will take that and run with it, because you never had the problem that people couldn't solve these problems. It's that we never kind of enabled them to do it. And it totally shifts how people feel about ownership of their own work and their own destiny in a way that makes AI actually really empowering for people in terms of the problem space that it opens up for them to go address.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right. So for those who might have just joined us, again, we're with Alfredo Ramirez, who is here with us. He's VP of Revenue Strategy at Microsoft, and we're digging into the rise of the business builder, how vibe coding helps teams get real value from AI beyond chat. And we're going to go into our next question. This has been so great, Alfredo. Thank you so much. So once business teams can build and test their ideas quickly, how does that change the way work gets requested, how it gets prioritized and delivered day to day?
Yeah, it kind of permeates everything we do, right? Because one, people stop accepting the status quo as given. Sort of everything becomes flexible now. If there's work that you don't like to do, oh, well, how can I go build myself something that helps me solve that more quickly? Or, oh man, this process doesn't really work. Oh, well, how can I re-engineer the process or automate some of these manual steps, in a way that makes it better for everyone? Or, man, I really wish I had this tool that solved this problem for me. It's oh, well, I'll go build it. Or I'll explore, right, what it would look like to build it. Because I'm sure every engineer's worst nightmare is requirements that aren't grounded in reality from the business.
Yes.
And so you kind of like shift that because now it's like the folks in the business can actually do some prototyping, they can do some feasibility testing. And so then once actually things show up to engineering, you know it can move forward and it's been specified,
Yes.
much more clearly than it would have been, in the past. And those folks can sit side by side with one another and actually speak the same language in a way that was much more difficult for them to do before. And you kind of had, the challenge of like bridging, between engineering and the business that now starts to get much more clear.
Yeah. It's so important, that bridging. It's amazing. We talked about you have a mantra of just start building, and that's incredibly actionable, just to empower your team to just get going. Why do you think that works well for leaders? So we talked about how that works for your team members to just start building. For leaders, what do you think that means to just kind of move faster and just start building?
Well, there's a lot to it. One is you do move faster. And that, of course, we are all being pushed, to move faster, to deliver more quickly, to respond with agility. And that's just tremendous.
Yep.
But you also start to like unlock the full capabilities, of your team.
Yep.
You start to see things that you didn't know were there or that were possible. You start to uncover problems that you didn't know existed, and folks are just solving them. And that's pretty amazing. I think also you see it culturally, right? People feel so much more empowered, and they feel more willing and able to sort of tackle the whole problem versus thinking about staying, just in their lane because they felt constrained by their ability to actually go outside of it.
Yes.
And so I think it just leads to like healthier teams who feel happier and more empowered to go solve big problems. And that's kind of what we all need these days.
Yeah, spend more time on the work you love. Yeah, I love that. All right, we're going to start to pull up some questions from our audience. And the first one I'm seeing is, how do you handle governance and security?
Yeah, so let's be super clear, right? These are non-negotiables, right? There are, at Microsoft, right? We have enterprise promises to keep around security, compliance, privacy, and we take those super seriously. And so what I've personally found is we build the same way anyone else builds, right? We follow the same secure development lifecycle that any other team does. And so you think about prototypes that you can build, but then when you want to deploy them, they go through that exact same process, right? We use our enterprise approved tools, we deploy them in Azure, following the same, security policies that, anybody else would follow. And this is also a place where like the agents can really help us, because we can bake in some of those policies, we can bake in the guardrails, and ensure ultimately that we're following the exact same process that anyone else would to deploy software. You just do it a lot more quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. All right, our next one is around, what about people who are resistant or intimidated by AI, by vibe coding? Have you had personal experience with team members or, just seeing folks who are resistant but maybe came around? And how did they go on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's the single biggest challenge, right? Is that we've all kind of been taught that some of these tools and some of these capabilities are for, certain professions that aren't the one that we're in, right? And so it can be intimidating to even get started. And it's the moment you can get someone to even just like install VS Code and start prompting it, that starts to shift immediately. And so for me, like I mentioned, with AI Accelerator, the way we solve it is by building a community around it, because then you can sort of think about folks sort of like in rings, right? You have your very inner ring of folks that are like willing to try anything and will go experiment. And when they start to show some of the things that they can do, that gets your next ring of folks thinking like, maybe I can do that too. And it starts to sort of like reverberate out, right? Like you think about it sort of like, expanding rings, like ripples in a lake or something like that. And it's really then about bringing everyone along and things starting to build on top of each other. And that's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. Community is so important, and just start building, just start experimenting. All right, so let's break it down here with one next question around what skills do people actually need to be impactful with vibe coding? So we talked about you don't need to know how to code, but what skills do you need to have in order to be good at vibe coding?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main skills are being good at asking questions,
Okay.
right? I mean, the way I tell people to think about like these coding agents is like imagine you have a genius intern who knows nothing about your business
Yeah.
and who's only going to work here for one day.
Okay.
Okay, and so you have to think about then how do you create the right context? How do you test their assumptions?
Yeah.
You know, if you don't know how to do something, how do you ask the right questions?
Yep.
When something goes wrong, how do you get curious about that?
Yep.
And then how do you create context along the way such that, you know, when your new genius intern shows up tomorrow who also doesn't know anything about your business, you started to create institutional memory. You know, you've written things down, you've created task lists, you've created agent memory
Yeah.
that then it can leverage for the next things that you do. And so fundamentally, it's about being thoughtful about how you ask questions, you know, how you approach problems, systems thinking,
Yeah.
and being able to just at all times be curious and look around corners.
Yeah.
And I think these are skills that are much more pervasive than traditional, you know, software development skills are.
Yes.
And if you can start to apply them in this context, I think you'll be surprised at like what you can figure out and do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, just be curious and be comfortable asking questions. All right. And the next one is around measuring impact. So, how do you actually measure the impact of the vibe coding implementation on your team? What are some metrics that you're looking at to see how impactful it's been?
Well, we have all kinds of metrics. I mean, you have productivity metrics, right? And so certainly, like, you know, we can see places where folks were spending, you know, 10 hours, you know, on some process that now takes minutes.
Yeah.
We see it in error rates, right? Where things that required, let's say, manual, you know, validation or manual entry, where folks have now like, you know, built automation tooling.
Yep.
Suddenly your error rates go down quite a bit.
Yep.
You know, we also see places where like actual business metrics start moving. You know, I lead revenue strategy, right? That includes a lot of work on sort of like sales operations side and how do we help, you know, our vast sales force, for example, manage our pipeline and our forecast, and adding in, you know, automation there, the tools that folks have built who really understand the problems, actually start to move the needle for us on like real business KPIs.
Oh, that's so exciting.
And so you can kind of see it at different kinds of layers and levels. And so really it's about, I wouldn't start with the end in mind per se,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
like let people loose.
Yeah.
You know, start
Yes.
experimenting.
Start building.
I guarantee you will see ROI.
Okay.
And
very
maybe
cool.
in places you didn't even expect it.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So, our next one, when learning and getting started, do you recommend the use of AI or not? So, when you're just learning and getting started, do you recommend using AI? And if yes, how should we take advantage of AI?
Yeah, I mean, this is all about using AI, right? And I think, you know, if you start from zero, from blank sheet, it's, you know, basically install, you know, Visual Studio Code
Yep.
and start asking GitHub Copilot, hey, what can you do for me? Or I want to solve this problem. How would you approach it?
Yeah.
What are some good things that I can think about? Hey, like, I don't know how to do X.
Yeah,
Can you
right.
help? Can
Yeah.
you help me figure that out?
Yeah, I can tell you how to
And
do
so really it starts to sort of like unspool, right, into like that first thread, that first, you know, conversation unspools into a set of actions and learnings. And you'll find that like as you go and you use it, even just through this conversational interface,
Yeah.
you start to pick up things and
Yeah.
you start to be able to, you know, have more context and understanding of the kinds of things to ask or the kinds of things to watch out for.
Yeah.
And you're kind of learning like really organically in the flow.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really powerful about this new way of like interacting with technology.
Yeah, I love that. You don't need to have all the answers already. You can just ask it to help you get
Yeah.
there. That's amazing. All right, next up, how do you balance vibe coding agility for domain experts with the proper governance and technical quality at scale?
Well, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve, right? And I think you're going to be very intentional about that,
Yeah.
right? If you think about a large enterprise, you're going to have a whole bunch of like internal problems and processes and internal customers that don't require the same type of like production level scale or production level polish than something that you would be deploying out to a customer.
Right.
And so certainly as a leader, you need to have that judgment and understanding of like, what are the problems where like somebody can build, a quick hack or a quick tool that actually has real impact for a lot of folks and solves a problem, versus where is it more so like, hey, let's prototype something and then let's go work with an engineering team to build like an enterprise grade solution. And so ultimately it's not an or, it's it's how do you integrate it into the process, and how do you recognize when something requires maybe a greater level of maturity or scale, and then sort of complete the thought into that.
Yeah, I love that. It's not an or, it's more of an and. Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, that went by really quickly, and we are actually running out of time. So I wanted to make sure to leave our audience with a few quick takeaways that we'll also have our chat moderator put in the chat. And Alfredo covered all of these. So the first is you don't need to know how to code. You just need to know what to ask for. You need to get comfortable asking questions. The second one is that vibe coding can help leaders see this full spectrum, move beyond chat prompts, interactive tools, and multi-step workflows to go to the next level. And the third is around just start building. So we talked about that a lot. Leaders, when they engage with their own data and their ideas are transformed in real time, that's when the difference starts to happen. So thank you so much, Alfredo. This has been an amazing conversation. It's been so fun, and I'm sure so helpful to so many people.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great. Thank you. And everyone, make sure to follow Alfredo on LinkedIn for more leadership level lessons on practical AI adoption in real operations. And thanks everyone for joining us. That's great.